Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheely here again, back for another episode of the History of Comics podcast. This time, part 2, the history of war comic books. When we last left off, we were still in the middle of World War I and the comic books that did adaptations of that, the Great War, and now we're going to keep going. The Phantom Eagle first appeared in WOW Comics number 6 on July 1942 from Fawcett Comics, and was originally a teenage Mickey Malone who dons a stylized aviation suit and builds his own fighter plane to serve in World War II. He later formed his own team, the Phoenix Squadron, a group of fellow teenage pilots in post-war, and starts a charter airline service while searching for the Golden Chalice, which is supposed to contain the formula of peace. Later, when Marvel acquired the character after Fawcett went under, the character was rebooted in Marvel Superheroes number 16 by writer Gary Friedrich and artist Herb Trimpe on September 1968, this time as Karl Kaufman, an American fighting ace who creates the guise of the Phantom Eagle so his German parents couldn't be attacked. The character will eventually join the patriotic super team, the Freedom Five, which also consisted of Crimson Cavalier, the Silver Squire, Sir Steel, and Union Jack, while engaging in time travel adventures and ghost stories, joining forces with everyone from the Hulk to Doctor Strange. Later, the character was revived again in Marvel's Max line as in War is Hell, the first flight of the Phantom Eagle in 2008 by Garth Ennis and Howard Chaykin, a 5-issue miniseries that lasted from May to September of that year. This was an alternative reality version of the character, once again set in World War I, but the character would later reappear again in the Secret Wars tie-in of 2015, Where Monsters Dwell, by Garth Ennis and Russell Braun. Air Fighters number 3 by Hillman was produced in 1942 about Baron Inuman, who in the comic book was a member of von Richtenhoff's the Red Baron's squadron. However, when his plane is shot down, Inuman crashes and sinks into a swamp where he is transformed into the Heap, a monster that will later become the inspiration for the future swamp-like creatures like from Marvel's Man-Thing to DC Swamp Thing. All-American Man of War number 112 in 1965 by DC featured Steve Savage, Balloon Buster, created by Robert Kinnear. Savage would appear sporadically throughout DC, dressing like a cowboy while disappointing his superiors, who only put him up with him due to his expert pilot skills and ability to destroy German combat blimps over France during World War I. The Victor by D.C. Thompson, that ran from January 25, 1961 to November 1992 for 1,657 issues, was meant to spotlight the heroism of medal award-winning British and Commonwealth troops in comic book format. Its weekly True Stories segment highlighted such stories, and in 1963 it featured Ace of Aces about Canadian flying ace Billy Bishop, who received both the Distinguished Flying Cross for 25 victories in 12 days before earning the Victoria Cross for single-handedly attacking a German aerodrome near the Vimy Ridge on June 2, 1917. By the end of World War I, Bishop would amass 72 victories, trailing only the Red Baron Manfred von Richtenhoff with 80, Reinfalk with 75, and Mick Manock with 73. He would later serve as the director of the Royal Canadian Air Force through World War II. Bishop's story was highlighted in the Blazing Combat number 2 as well in 1966 by writer Ari Goodwin and artist Alex Toth in a 6-page story. The end of E-15 was also told in The Victor, this time about the tragic destruction of HMS E-15, a Royal submarine who ran aground on April 17, 1915 while under the Turkish guns, with many lives lost trying to keep it from enemy hands. Lieutenant Commander Eric Robertson led the final assault on the craft, who had previously been recommended the Victoria Cross for his earlier exploits in Gallipoli. Another story from the Victor was Ensol's Eric Patrol, which told how on November 7, 1915, GSM Ensol, a 21-year-old second lieutenant in the 11th Squadron Royal Flying Corps, forced an enemy aircraft to land near Echet, France, while also driving off German fighters' planes before destroying the aircraft with a firebomb. Despite his plane's petrol tank being hit, he managed to fly back behind enemy Allied lines to safety, where he was eventually awarded the Victoria Cross. Edo Block-Sec by Jacques Tardy, while usually a mix of fantasy and science fiction, also became known for his horrific depiction of no man's land during the Great War. This was based on recollections from Tardy's own grandfather, a conscripted soldier who served in the trenches in World War I. Tardy kept the story as realistic and harrowing as possible, depicting the soldiers as just wanting to survive a few hours more. In one story, a soldier remained seated outside his trench would have his face blown off. Tardy's black and white art accentuated the wasteland while also noting that many nationalities, from Zengali to Vietnam, served for the French army. Tardy would return to the subject with Cette était la guerre des trenches. It was a trench warfare, furthering exploring World War I setting. Tardi also produced Varlet Soldier in 1997, using a two-panel page format about a World War I veteran, Varlet, who survives to become a private detective, though still haunted by the war. In an interesting twist on patriotic heroes of World War I, Our Army at War number 151 on February 1965 introduced Baron Hans von Hammer, created by Robert Kneier and Joe Kubert, about a German fighter pilot. He would be better known as Enemy Ace at DC, created to tell the German point of view of the war. Playing in on the Red Baron's mystique, he is presented as a brilliant and honorable pilot, meant to show even the enemy could produce such warriors, essentially a good guy fighting for the wrong side. To emphasize this, Kneier highlighted Hammer's devotion to serving his country, Germany, while showing his distaste for killing honorable fighter pilots. The character reappeared in Our Army at War number 153 and 155 before getting his own series via Showcase in issues number 57 and 58. In 1968, he took the lead in Star Spangled War Stories, issue number 138, and remained at the comic until the issue number 161 in 1972. He would return to Star Spangled again 2 years later with issue number 181, where he dueled with Steve Savage, the Balloon Buster, for 3 issues. Enemy Ace would later return in 10 issues for Men of War in 1977, beginning with the title's first issue and continuing in issue number 20 in 1979, and in a few appearances in The Unknown Soldier in 1981. He would only make sporadic appearances throughout the DC universe for the next decade until 1990, when the graphic novel Enemy Ace War Idol was produced by George Pratt, about a Vietnam veteran investigative reporter interviewing Von Hammer, and how they each put to rest the ghosts from their respective wars. The story concluded in 1969 with Von Hammer dying peacefully in a sanitarium at the age of 73. However, like nearly every other comic book character, death was not enough to keep Enemy Ace from appearing again. This time in Guns of the Dragon in 1998 by Tim Truman, a 6-part miniseries set in 1929 where he ends up on Dinosaur Island, a popular setting in the DC universe, and notably in their war comics. He would later return to Germany in Enemy Ace War in Heaven in 2001, a 2-issue miniseries written by Garth Ennis with art by Christian Alamy and Kristen Weston for the first issue, while Russ Heath provides art for the second. This series had Von Hammer leading a Luftwaffe squadron on the Russian front during World War II, only to surrender to another DC war hero, Sergeant Rock. His motivation for this comes from learning of the Holocaust during the Germany's Nazi regime and deciding his honor could no longer allow him to serve such a government. This story was inspired by Adolf Galland, a real-life World War II air ace who was also criticized Hermann Göring for the conduct of Nazis' air war, and upon World War II's end, actually became friends with his RAF rivals. Enemy Ace Von Hammer continues to make sporadic appearances in DC Comics, including his descendants. In issue number 139 of Robin, his great-granddaughter, Lieutenant Ilsa Von Hammer, appeared as a part of a group of soldiers that included Johnny Clouds, a member of the original Losers, grandson. One of the sadly undertold stories of World War I was the service of black soldiers, with a prime example being The Harlan Hellfighters by writer Max Brooks and artist Kenan White, a graphic novel released on April 1, 2014, about the African-American 369th Infantry Regiment. The regiment was deployed to France in 1918 and signed to the French Army due to white officers refusing to serve with them. Despite this racism, the regiment would serve 191 days in the trenches, more than any other American unit, while suffering the most casualties at 1,500. With these losses, they would also be the first Allied unit to reach the Rhine. They were nicknamed the Black Rattlers in America, Men of Bronze in France, and the Hellfighters by the Germans due to their fighting prowess, which produced 2 Medal of Honor winners. Brooks and White depict most of this in the graphic novel, including the parade the unit received in New York upon returning from war. Naturally, with all these war stories, it's no surprise that many comic creators actually served in the armed forces. As mentioned before, Bruce Barnesfather was a World War I veteran, while the rise of comic books directly preceded World War II, and like many professions, their ranks were entered the service. Some notable names were Will Eisner, Charles Schultz, Joe Simon, Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, Sam Glanzman, Joss Davis, Wally Wood, Bill Everett, Nick Carty, Bill Ward, Dan DiCarlo, and Carl Burgess, all who served in World War II in one capacity or another. Joe Kubert served during the Korean War, but joked that he was stationed in Europe during the conflict. Don Lomax, Doug Murray, and Larry Hama served in Vietnam. Each served in different capacities as well. Kirby and Schultz served in the European theater, while Stan Lee was in the Signals Corps with Charles Adams and Theodore Gessel, known to most today as Dr. Seuss. Gessel produced numerous political cartoons in support of the war for PM, a left-leaning New York newspaper, in which he attacked Hitler and Mussolini while also criticizing non-interventionists such as Charles Lindbergh. These cartoons were later collected in Dr. Seuss Goes to War in 1999, which also showed a hypocritical view of calling all Japanese Americans traitors while deploring racist attacks against Jews and blacks. Another notable cartoonist who served during World War II and whose work was inspired by it was Bill Mauldin, who enlisted in the Arizona National Guard in 1940 before he was incorporated into the 45th Infantry Division. While in the service, he volunteered his skills as a cartoonist in the unit's newspaper, where he created Willie and Joe, characters meant to represent the average GI. Mauldin would land with the 45th with the invasion of Sicily in 1943, where he continued to provide cartoons for Stars and Stripes, the American soldiers' newspaper, before being transferred to it completely on February 1944, where he was given his own Jeep to tour the front, gathering material for his 6 cartoons he produced a week. Despite being in the employ of the Army, that didn't stop Mauldin from being critical at times, lampooning the spit-inside mentality and even ridiculed General George Patton, who threatened to throw him into jail over it. However, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower ordered him to stay away from Mauldin as he considered his cartoons a good outlet for soldiers' frustrations. Interestingly enough, in a 1989 interview, Mauldin said he admired Patton, and while he thought he was insane, said Patton's military genius did help the U.S. win the war. As for regular soldiers, Mauldin's cartoons were admired by them, and he would win the Legion of Merit and the Pulitzer Prize for his work. By the end of the war, Mauldin wanted to have Willie and Joe killed off, but his editor at Stars and Stripes dissuaded him otherwise. His work would later be collected in Up Front, with Willie even appearing on the cover of June 18, 1945 issue of Time magazine. After the war, Mauldin became a political cartoonist and even worked with the American Civil Liberties Union and at the Chicago Sun-Times, where he created the classic cartoon of Abraham Lincoln weeping at the Lincoln Memorial after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Fellow cartoonist and World War II veteran Charles Schulz would pay tribute to him in his Peanuts strip from 1969 to 1998, where Snoopy, dressed as an Army vet, would visit Mauldin at his house, drink some root beer, and trade war stories over every Veterans Day. Mauldin would even draw Willie and Joe one last time in 1998 Peanuts strip, with Schulz signing, "Schulz and my hero," with Mauldin's signature underneath. Bill Mauldin would die on January 22, 2003, and be buried on the 29th in Arlington National Cemetery. Of all the wars that influenced comic books, it was World War II that was the most significant, as it occurred right when the comic books were entering the mainstream. When the war broke out, comic books were quick to be used as propaganda in support of the war effort, though they did feature some dated racial depictions, such as JoJo and Captain Marvel Adventures No. 12 by Otto Binder and C.C. Beck in 1942, which depicted him with yellow skin and buck teeth, resembling that of Bugs Bunny over an actual human. Irv Novak, though, showed restraint in Zip Comics with issue number 26 by 1942, and Tojo and other Japanese characters, as Steel Sterling flies in the Pacific to stop Tojo's broadcast to the nation. Hitler was a natural target, though, with his mustache and hair mocked in almost cartoonish fashion. The most popular example, of course, is Captain America Comics No. 1 on March of 1941 by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, with the iconic cover of him punching Hitler out. Liv Gleason Publications joined in the fun with the original Daredevil comic, whose first issue actually was titled Daredevil Battles Hitler on November 1941. Hitler would become a regular villain in the series, with other heroes, from the Speed King to the Boy Inventor, getting a chance to knock the dictator out. Justice League of America No. 108 by Lynn Wein and Dick Diller had the team take on a robot Hitler in 1973. However, it was the Fantastic Four No. 21 in December of 1963 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby that had Adolf Hitler made into a full-blown supervillain, when it was revealed that Hatemonger is actually his clone thanks to the scientist Armin Zola. The character has appeared throughout Marvel Comics ever since, and it makes a natural villain. As Stan Lee commented, when comic books needed villains, the Nazis were perfect. Further examples of propaganda came from Look magazine, who commissioned Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster to do a 2-page spread on how Superman would end the war. It was so prominent it garnered the attention of no less than Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, who in his Nazi newspaper Das Schwarze Korps, the Black Battalion, called Siegel an intellectually and physically circumcised chap, in a jab to him being Jewish, and noted the invented Israelite named this pleasant guy with an overdeveloped body and undeveloped mind Superman. Hey, if you make a Nazi mad, you must be doing something right. An irony, considering that the comic book critic Frederick Warren would cite Superman as being Nazi propaganda in the 1950s. Of course, comic books didn't provide propaganda, but also helped support the war directly through selling war bonds. The cover of Captain Marvel Adventures No. 15 by C.C. Beck and Pete Costanza was given away as a prize in a contest for war bonds. That same year, Uncle Sam Quarterly No. 4 by Quality spotlighted kids who helped the war effort, sponsored by Tootsie Rolls. Even the ads had a patriotic flair, as kids were encouraged to sell seeds called Victory Seeds to help with the war effort. There were numerous patriotic heroes, such as the Shield, who first appeared in Pep Comics #1 by